I am filming this while my children are asleep, so cross my fingers I'll be able to get through all 10. If not, you're going to see a very odd cut. This is my top 10 reflection for 2024. Every year since my daughter was born, I have tried to keep my expectations low and only giving myself 10 books that are must reads for the year. These are the books that I am most excited about, the ones that I truly want to get done that year. So this is my list from 2024, and we'll have a little bit of reflection on it. I did not manage to finish all of my 10 books, and you're going to see why. But I finished 9 out of 10, so I'm going to call that a win. And I also read 80 books. So let's give ourselves some credit. And most of these books were wins. So I'm glad to see that I am picking books that I know I'm going to enjoy. Let's start with the book that I finished most recently and my most favorite video I have ever made, and that is Charles Williams' The Place of the Lion. This is a reread for me. I read this first in 2017, and I absolutely adore Charles Williams. So much so, I made a video about him and who he was and all of his works, and I'm going to link that below because it is one of my most favorite videos I've ever made. This is Platonic ideals come to life in an English countryside. So, a Platonic ideal is the original idea of something. So, you have the apple, but the original apple out of all of them. So, where did it come from? This Platonic ideal. And you get this in the form of animals. And the animals are essentially a manifestation of an ideal, an idea. So you get strength manifested, and wonder, speed, and is it cunning? I don't know. This is a very brainy book, but I find that he blends philosophical ideas with theological ideas in a really cool way, that these Platonic ideals are almost like celestial beings. This doesn't really tell you a whole lot about this one. There are two men, Anthony and Quentin, and they live in this town, and they are just kind of hanging out when one day this lion comes and attacks this man in front of them, and that sets off a chain of events. We get to see the eyes mostly through Anthony and his sort of determination to figure out and root out what's actually happening. This is by far the one book that I would most recommend for any new readers to Charles Williams. In 2023, on my top 10 list, I had The Justice of Kings, and I absolutely adored this. So I put The Tyranny of Faith, which is book 2, on my top 10, and I did read this. This is a chunker of a book, and right now I am struggling to read physically. Unfortunately, while I read this one in a couple of days, I read this one in a couple of months. And I think that inhibited my complete enjoyment of this. This is still like a 4 or 4.5. This is incredible. I am continuing on with the series. This is a kind of world where the empire is failing, and we're following a justice who's kind of like a judge, and his assistant clerk, who's Helena, and she's the narrator, and she's telling it from an older point of view. So she's saying and little did we know that was only the least of our troubles. Things like that, where it just propels the story forward. I've seen a lot of people explain this as, or describe it as religious horror. I'm gonna argue that, because if you have possessed nuns, man, I didn't really get the religious horror. In fact, I felt like this was more Lovecraftian and eldritch horror and ancient beings ripping through time and space and attacking the real world and demons that crawl in the shadows. Like, that's more the horror that this is, and it is creepy and wonderful. And like, the first part of this book is like really intense, and my favorite character came in like the middle, and I adored her. And then she wasn't like, she didn't end up being really good, but I really enjoyed her anyway. And thank you, Richard Swan, for making me feel for a person that's not a good person. So definitely third book on my series for next year. Okay, let's get it out of the way. This is the book that I did not finish, and that is the Shahnameh. This is a collection of Persian poetry, epic poems. This is also a translated work, so it reads pretty clunkily, and I think that's why I only got to here. I didn't get very far in. It was more like if you wanted to read Beowulf and it was just somebody kind of giving you the plot points rather than the poetry, and just saying like, and then Beowulf went to the hall and he sang a song and he talked about how he was going to kill someone, and it was very stark and bland and kind of stripped of personality. So I think that's why I struggled with this one. I really did want to read this one, and I'm still considering going through it. It's super easy to pick up and put down because each story is like 2 or 3 pages. So I think this one will just be a continuous one. I had 2 books on my list for my classic science fiction challenge, and the first one of that was Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. This book surprised me. It is big, but it flew by for me. I made a whole video of books that I thought gave Leo energy. They were only going to be 5 stars, and this was a 5 star. I was blown away. I really enjoyed the whole setup and premise, and just the exploration. This is following people who have been chosen to go colonize Mars, and it follows them traveling to Mars and then settling Mars, and then like 20 years in the future, what's going on there, and rebels and corruption, and literally just what happens with society and kind of the inevitability of humanity. And I just loved this. I did not like the characters. They were not as complex as maybe I wanted them to be, and my favorite characters were of course side female characters. So, it's what happens when you get some classic science fiction. That's okay. I do want to read the next book, which I think is Green Mars. So we'll see about that one continuing for this year. The other book that I read for science fiction was Old Man's War. I read this at the beginning of the year and was pleasantly surprised. It is so funny. I was not expecting it to be like laugh out loud, chuckling, my husband kind of going like, what are you reading? And the reason why I don't have this is because I lent it to a friend of mine because I thought he would really enjoy it. Thought it was very accessible as a science fiction. And just like that, one of my kids has woken up, so we're gonna put a pause on that. Same day, so not too bad. So I was at the Old Man's War, set in a time where you reach the age of 70 and you can decide to forego absolutely everything on Earth, get sent into space, and fight the farthest reaches of the galaxies against aliens, and basically have, I think it's 10 years in the military. It's either 10 or 5 years in the military. And then once you have fulfilled those years, you get given a piece of land on a colony on some far planet. And it's all about this idea of life after life. And it's very poignant. There's exploration of grief, leaving the home you once knew. The main character has lost his wife, and I found that particularly heart-wrenching. It was more poignant than I expected it to be, and really lovely. I really enjoyed this. Also, laugh out loud funny. So, if you are looking for a gateway science fiction, I would recommend this one. Okay. Another science fiction, but this one is a reread. That is The Sea of Tranquility. Emily St. John Mandel is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now, I first came upon her with Station 11. Most people did. This one came out. I read it twice in the year that it came out and adored it both times. I listened to it and then I read it on my ebook and I had to own it. And this was my first time reading it with my eyeballs. It was no less of a wonderful experience. It is a bingeable book, but it also makes it you put it down and think about a lot of things. This is set during a pandemic. I think the same one that takes place in Station 11, and it follows mainly a man called Gaspre and his sort of connections all throughout time. So we start in Vancouver Island, which is where I live, so I connect with that. At some point, he's on a farm. I connect with that. There is an author in this book who sacrifices her career for, or rather, she doesn't sacrifice, she makes a choice to focus on her family, and that's a choice that I have very recently made. I just connect with this one so much. This is one of my most favorite books ever, along with Station 11. I just adore this one, and I'm so happy that I reread it. Another reread was Vita Nostra. I also, in the same vein as Sea of Tranquility, read it same year. I read it as an ebook first, and this one I read as an ebook, and the entire time I was reading, I thought, I need to annotate this. So I bought a physical copy with the intent of reading it, and I made it my top 10, and I read it, and it is still just as brilliant. It is a journey. I still don't really know what happened in the end. I have gone on discussion boards to kind of see what other people have been saying, and thankfully no one has a straight answer, and those are the types of books that I absolutely love, the ones where you can keep talking about for years and years and years. This one I interpreted differently both times. So the second time I read this, I thought that's odd. That's not how I read it the first time. And I think that's wonderful. That's why you reread. Not that I was in a totally different space. It was just 2 years ago, but it read differently. This is, I would say, a dark academia, a proper dark academia, where this girl gets recruited to this special institute of technologies, and there she starts learning sort of basics like mathematics and economics, and then there's some other courses that are just a little bit different. And one of the reasons why I love this one so much, it is metaphysical, just like Charles Williams. It deals with things that are intangible. What does trust look like if it was made manifest? What does love look like? What does terror or fear look like? This is explored all through the lens of a very fascinating character. I don't want to say she's a blank slate because she's not, but she's a bit of an enigma. She is difficult to get a handle on. And the reason why I connect with this one so much is it so perfectly encapsulates the struggles with academia and the expectations that not only you put on yourself, but you feel your professors put on you, whether they mean to or not. I attended a music school. I have a bachelor's in music, and I related so hard to this with students having breakdowns because they're staying up late practicing and just trying to get the materials. So this is definitely one of my all-time favorites. I would recommend this highly for people who love dark academia, proper commentary on the academic culture. When I was gathering my books to do this video, I completely forgot that this was one of my books that I had put on because I read it at the beginning of the year and it was just whoosh, out of my brain, which is saying something. But that is The Moon of the Turning Leaves. The first one being Moon of the Crusted Snow, I read several years back and adored. This is sort of apocalyptic, small town, northern Ontario, where we follow a family on a reserve and they're dealing with the possibility of intruders and trying to look after each other and not really knowing what's going on with the rest of the world because they're very cut off. This is very different in feel. It follows the same character, whom I loved, and him and his daughter, and it's basically a love letter to fathers and daughters and that special bond, that relationship. This is much more of a quieter book. This one reads a bit more like a thriller or a mystery. This one is definitely more contemplative and musing on different aspects of how to move on after a disaster. It's a little quieter, it's a little more gentle, and if you were expecting the same kind of thriller, you're not going to get that with this one. So this one was more of a 4-star for me, and that's just because it was different from what I expected, but nonetheless beautiful. Okay, I did not read this hefty book. I read this book. So this is the 9 Princes in Amber series, the first 5 books following Corwin, and I think they call it just a cycle. So I figured I would close the cycle by reading the 5th book and feeling like I might be done with this series. I'm only halfway through, I'm not sure. It's really heavy. This is such a fascinating world, and I struggle with the writing. It feels juvenile. I can't explain why it feels so juvenile. The violence feels kind of offhanded and flippant, and he does this really cool thing where I think people described it as a hell ride, and he kind of just travels through all different time and space, and it's like choo, 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 and he's experiencing different worlds, tastes, smells, all these things kind of coming at you. And the only issue is the way that he writes it. He'll write beautiful descriptive poetry, and it'll be like the sentence and then dot dot dot, and then the sentence and then dot dot dot, and then the sentence and dot dot dot, and the sentence for dot 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 for pages. For pages. Like, this happens in every single book, and it's cool at first. But when you're reading like 10 pages worth of this in the final book, you're just like, okay, I get it. You're experimenting, and it's great, but it could have been half a page. It could have really been cut down. I also struggle with the way there's a lot of telling, in that 2 characters will have a conversation and tell you what happened rather than showing you what happened. We could have so easily been present at this confrontation or murder or whatever's going on, but instead we're getting the after telling of it, and it makes it really dry. So I just struggled with this series, and I'm glad that I've closed it. I don't know if I'm going to continue going on. It's fun, but I find myself pretty bored with it and pretty let down by the cool ideas with poor writing, and I can't get past that. And the very last book that I finished in my top 10 was Storm. A little bit out of my range. This is an eco novel. It's very different from anything that I have ever read before. This is following a storm, Mariah, from birth to death. And it's set, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. But we're getting the view of it through the weathermen, through the snowplowmen, the road managers, the people, and sometimes even animals. There is a dramatic paragraph with an owl that I enjoyed is not quite the right word, but it was impactful. Coming from a place, growing up in a place that had a lot of snow, there was a lot of questionable activities by people driving in said snow, and the snow plowmen making decisions. The chief road guy, just close the road. Don't let people get stuck on the road. There were cool descriptions of traffic jams from multiple points of view. Like the way that this was crafted. How can weather be interesting? I kept thinking back to a book that I read a long time ago, and it was called The Children's Blizzard, and that one was nonfiction. And that one made weather interesting. And this is fiction. It's fiction about a storm. And it was interesting. I started reading it and I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be dry. This whole thing, I'm not going to be able to handle it. But nope, it fully sucks you in. And if you are interested in giving something very different a chance, the writing is impeccable. And I could not stop reading it for all the different viewpoints because I was so excited to read what was coming next. There are some people that we do follow all the way through, like the weatherman who names all of his storms ending with Aya. So it's like Claudia or Monica. And then he runs out of names and he goes with, okay, Mariah, I'll just go with Mariah. And Mariah is like a baby storm and it becomes this big thing that sweeps across the United States and Canada. And it's really cool. There you have it. That is my top 10 of 2024. It was mostly successful. And I am very excited to bring you my next video, which will be my top 10 of 2025. We'll see you then. It's 2025. Oh, I can't believe it.